welcome to Finlos Lives. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about something that I read, and Eva read actually as well, towards the end of the summer. And there was a lot of chatter suddenly around this new phenomenon that commentators and journalists were dubbing the quiet quit. And the more I read about this phenomenon as described, the more I became really interested in why this might be happening, why it's such a concern for business owners and economists, and what I think are a lot of misconceptions or missed opportunities in understanding why employees and workers behave the way that they do. And this is of particular interest to me as I recently switched to being a fully remote worker, which accounts for most of the folks that are being described as these quiet quitters. And there's a couple of ways that these commentators are defining that term, quiet quitters. But as best as I understand it, what it largely refers to is folks around my age, late 20s into their 30s, maybe approaching their 40s, who are full-time or part-time remote workers telecommuting. Perhaps they recently switched to remote work because of the pandemic. Perhaps they have been gig workers. But it's noted that, according to these economists, that as time goes on, their productivity diminishes. And it eventually reaches the point where employers feel that they have no other recourse but to fire these individuals. So the quiet quit refers to employees who diminish their output to the point where they are forced to be fired. And I think that there's a lot of problems with how people are viewing what is happening with workers right now. And I do think that a lot of this actually has been brought to the surface due to the massive economic shifts that were taking place during the pandemic. I think I can't deny how much of a shift, even for myself, the pandemic forced me to really reconsider who I am as a worker and as an employee. As a teacher, personally, and I know largely teachers in general are expected to do so much more than is accounted for by their salary hours. And of course, this is a cliche, right? Teachers work dozens of hours per week beyond what they're paid for. And it's just assumed to be an acceptable part of the job, right? We work for the passion, not for the money. And that's true to a large extent. And that's true of many professions that are salaried, that are very professional, who are viewed as essential because of the services that they provide. But the social contracts negotiated in the 20th century around benefits and salary have diminished over time, so that while the expectations of the workers has remained steady and that output and production are always expected to increase over time, the compensation in terms of benefits and time off have decreased. And then, of course, it's not just about the money. And so these are all of the issues that I want to get into as we talk about how perceptions of workers and even how workers view themselves and what they are willing to or now less willing to accept. And so as I was preparing for this, I found a couple of interesting reports. One comes from the McKinsey American Opportunity Survey, and this is an organization that does these economic surveys pretty regularly, but this one is specifically referring to remote workers during the pandemic. And at the peak of the pandemic, this survey indicates that 58% of respondents said they had the opportunity to work at least one day a week from home. 35% responded that they could work 5 days or a full work week from home. And of all the people who were offered the opportunity to have a flexible schedule or a hybrid schedule, 87% of those people who were offered the option to work from home took it. Again, 87% of people who were offered the opportunity to work from home took it, which is an indication that this is something that people want. And our instincts immediately go to the idea that, if there's nobody there to function as a taskmaster, that people are going to slack off. And I bet that that's true to a certain extent. Like, I don't want to use the word slacking, but yes, there is the potential for folks to perhaps drift from their tasks more frequently because there is less of a threat of retribution or of consequence in a negative way from some sort of supervisor. But I think that it might be argued that that sort of external motivator only will take people so far in terms of the quality of their work. There's this idea of looking busy versus actually really being busy. And the survey continues, and there's a few more pieces of information that I found interesting. There was a gender disparity between how that telework was distributed. 61% of men were offered work, while only 52% of women were offered work. And of course, this is the problematic binary, which is not taking into account modern definitions of gender, but this is what we have to work with. Largely, what this report indicates for those who responded is that job seekers, those who are looking for new opportunities for work, or those who are already in the field but perhaps looking to change their work opportunities, are looking for more autonomy. They're looking for more independence in how they work and where they work. And the survey reflects sweeping changes in the U.S. workforce. 92 million workers were offered flexible work. 80 million actually engaged in flexible work. And now, a vast majority of people seeking traditional work opportunities are citing that they would like some form of flexible work as a motivator for either seeking a new job or to find a job at all. And this is a huge cultural shift. NPR also had a report, and their headline is eye-catching, of course, and it says that Americans are becoming less productive, and that's a risk to the economy. This article was interesting for a few reasons. One, obviously, that clickbait title is a little deceiving. But what this article does, I think, get to is an overwhelming or a potential sense of ennui that workers began to experience during the pandemic. A sense of perhaps directionlessness, or that there is an unclear path for where their career was taking them, because the pandemic showed that even, full-time salaried positions are not as stable as we always think they are. A sudden shift in how we have to do business as a country or as a global population forces these rapid shifts, and many people found themselves suddenly without jobs because they were service workers or service employees and the businesses that they worked for closed. Suddenly, what it means to be a full-time employee shifted a lot. And so we suddenly see folks shifting into independent work, freelance work, side hustles, gig workers, Uber drivers and freelance writers and folks looking to make quick bucks with social media and content creation. And so I think that all of this is an indication that people are coming to discover a few things. That if given the opportunity or the choice, independence and freedom in how and where we do work is important. This is a conversation that I've had with people several times, especially with Evan. We have a common view on this, where offering employees money can only take you so far. Money and salary and that sort of thing are great at drawing the attention of new hires. But if the expectation is that productivity and work time increase, at some point, money can only do so much. Money can only truly compensate so much for loss of independent time and pursuits of hobbies and healthy activities that regenerate our bodies and our minds. And this takes us back to this phenomenon of quiet quitting. And when folks, commentators, journalists ask these workers why they are engaging in these less productive, to use that economic language, processes at work, what we're finding is that they prefer the flexibility of remote work because they can go outside during the daytime and engage their minds in things that are rejuvenating and regenerative, like going for a walk or having lunch with a friend or engaging in a hobby. And of course, the fear for business owners and employees is that that's taking away from work time. But what the research shows is that remote workers work at different times. They may not be as active during the day because that's when people should be active outside and doing things that are fun and exciting with friends and with family members. And instead, remote workers tend to work more into the evening. And they're happy and comfortable doing that. When given the chance, people will do what you ask them, but don't expect them to do more than you ask. And then when you offer more money to do more work, don't be surprised if sometimes people start to say no, because it's not worth it. We're finding that our mental health as workers is important and is significant. I know that was a huge aspect of why I decided to leave teaching as a profession. My profession that I love. I still consider myself a teacher and I miss the classroom, but the instability from politics to policy and the ever-increasing expectations and demands for flexibility were too much. And so when the opportunity came for me to work in a related field and to be able to do so from my home office, to have very specific productivity expectations, to meet those expectations, and then to be able to flex my schedule as needed and to meet my goals on my time, I think that is what the workforce of the future, well, actually, the workforce right now is looking for. And as the pandemic, well, at least the politicians will tell us that it's winding down, and as people have mostly returned to whatever we consider to be normal in terms of going out, we don't want to go back to an office. We don't want to go back to the old ways of doing things because it's bad for us. It's demoralizing, and it's a way to manipulate us into doing more than we actually can or should be doing. Because once you're in a place, it's harder to leave it. And I think that is honestly what employers are most concerned about, and why we're seeing this trend of technologies to document that people are staying busy on their computers, and then why you can now find mouse movers and things like that to keep screens active, because employers are afraid that workers, if they're not constantly watched, are not going to do their jobs. And I think that's, first of all, it's demeaning and dehumanizing. If you ask somebody to do a job for which they're hired, let them do their job and don't ask them to do more. And I think that's a fair expectation. I think that another thing to consider with the pandemic, and this received very mixed political responses, was that because of the pandemic and because so many people were suddenly losing jobs, the federal government increased the out-of-work benefit or the unemployment benefit. And so suddenly people stopped working and they started quitting just so they can receive these benefits. And while that might be true, and obviously we don't want to encourage people to just quit their jobs and live off of government handouts, the idea is that these things are limited. It's not an indefinite free paycheck. And it's actually a really interesting proposition, because so many people have stayed in their jobs because they work paycheck to paycheck, and they might be miserable. And so people say, oh, let's find another job. How? When can I find another job? If I'm not working, I'm not getting paid. If I'm not getting paid, then I'm losing my house, or I'm losing my car. I'm not getting groceries. I'm not having health care. So suddenly there is a new benefit, and you can actually not work for a period of time and get a small stipend from the government, a modest stipend, enough for some people to live, and actually start to look for new jobs, or start to explore different opportunities, get new certifications, or study for an entirely new career. Why aren't we concerned about individual happiness and fulfillment, and instead we are so concerned about productivity and profit margin? I think that's a huge problem. So quiet quitting is an interesting and perhaps faulty name for this phenomenon. Of course, there are exceptions to everything, and I think that there are people who really do push this. They push the envelope to the point where they can see what they can get away with, and that's bad. Obviously, we don't want people to be freeloaders, but I think the reality is employers have come to realize that workers have a lot of options now, and just offering more money isn't gonna cut it anymore. We have to get creative with how we compensate our workers and the expectations that we have with their time, because time is the most important commodity. Time is the ultimate privilege, and we can't forget that. Before we close out, I'm going to take a few minutes to discuss what we've been watching, and for this edition, we are going to be talking about Locke and Key on Netflix. The third season, the final season, just was released a couple months ago, and it was okay. It's nice to have a show that has a complete ending. No threads hanging, everything gets resolved. And you can like or not like the ending, whatever your opinions are, but it is just from a global perspective really nice to have a show with a concrete ending. I was initially surprised at how much I enjoyed the show. It has an easy enough setup, even if the idea of a massive vacant mansion Remaining mostly pristine and vacant is kind of preposterous. I guess the idea was that the property has been in the family for so long, and there isn't really much to pay, but I was willing to overlook the necessary plot element of this family moving into what is called the Key House. It's a huge mansion. Another issue that sometimes happens with shows like this is that young actors can be a burden to an otherwise effective story and quality production, but thankfully this show manages the talent well. The three Locke kids, the oldest of which is Tyler, who is played by a very youthful-looking Connor Jessup, who's actually 28. They manage their roles surprisingly well. Tyler is appropriately broody for somebody who's going on 18 years old. Amelia Jones, who plays Kinsey, is probably the best balance of the three children, with a complex range of emotions and opportunities to demonstrate those emotions. She even steps out on a limb to acknowledge romantic feelings for multiple people and tries to explore what that might look like. Bodie, the youngest of the brood, played by Jackson Robert Scott, seems to be perpetually grinning and speaks as though he is on a sugar rush, but it actually suits his character well enough. The story of Locke and Key centers on these children discovering magical keys, each of which has a specific function in or around the key house. These functions range from swapping faces, creating mirror traps, and opening doors to anywhere. They're all very handy to getting into mischief, of course. And no power comes for free, and it turns out demons from another dimension are interested in gaining control of these keys for reasons, none of which are good or would end with the Locke family or the world happy, which is why the house was left empty. The story isn't that deep, and it's okay really, because it allows the writers to use the framework of the magical conflict to explore the characters and their various traumas and failings. It all serves to make the Locke family feel very human, even when they are annoying. Throughout the show's 3 seasons, the writers engage with themes of addiction, of both the substance and magical varieties, memories, and the human tendency to want to forget the harm we have done and hide from the consequences, and how a family copes with and begins to heal from the loss of a parent. The show is based on the comic book series by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez, the former being the son of fellow author Stephen King. If some of these elements sound familiar, it may be because you have read either author's other works, but especially those of King's Dark Tower series, as the show has several nods to that series of books, indicating a more than passing connection to the Dark Tower universe. If you look closely at the knob on the front door to Key House or the title splash screen, you'll notice that the KH logo look to form the word Ka, K-A, Ka, and any Stephen King reader will know what that means. Credit to Eva for spotting that detail. I haven't read the show's source material, but the series stands on its own and is worth watching. It has a decent run of 3 seasons on Netflix, which is nice considering the numerous other shows that get a season or 2 before their unceremonious cancellations without resolution. If you decide to watch this one, take comfort in knowing you'll get a complete story. Netflix's Locke and Key is a bit silly at times, but makes up for it with some endearing characters, especially those in the background who round out the recurring cast. If you are looking for something to watch in theme with the spooky season, this one might just scratch the itch. It has some cursing and a little violence, but is mostly kid-friendly. It's officially rated TV-14. It might even spur some meaningful conversations about coping with stress, healthy communication, family secrets, and non-traditional relationship structures. That's it for this episode of Finlos Lives. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out to me on social media, or you can send me an email to finloslives@gmail.com, or leave me a voicemail via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. I look forward to our next conversation.